guys, look, I recorded this at the end of the video again. This is the intro that we shot at the end. Today's video is just kind of, well, Overwatch, getting some loot boxes, but also talking about where story games are just in general right now. Having like all these battle royales is great, you know, puts a lot of people like on the map in terms of content, in terms of shit. That's not what games are meant to be, right? Games are meant to be this kind of like when I think of like a single player game, I think of it as like a very closed off experience. There's something about just playing a game by yourself. There was a number of years where I would play games that were like solos. I would just play single player all the time. Games have become a way more social thing than I think anyone initially intended. I mean, I think gaming it can be a social thing, but it feels like a lot of these battle royales, it's their only thing. You look at God of War, and that game has a very good story. You know, is very story based and story driven, and it gets like lauded as like, oh, it's one of the best games. It's so good, and the gameplay's great, and the story's great. But because there's so few games now that give a fuck about single player story, I wonder if like some of that is just people being like, oh look, in this sea of no story and no, you know, no artistic vision, we have this game. You know what I mean? We have God of War. I don't remember when God of War 2 and 3 came out, everyone was talking about the story. No one talked about the story. They just thought it was so cool you could rip people's heads off and it was this great thing. And it actually has a pretty decent story I've never played it, but from what I've read, 2 and 3 have a decent story. But then the new, you know, the reboot, God of War 4 comes out and like, I don't know, people just fucking nut over it. I feel like people hype up single player stories now, like single player story-based games, because there's so few. The Last of Us, oh, it's so good. The gameplay is, but the story is so good. And it's like, is it? Or is it just because there's no story-based games now? Or there's less. Not to say there's none, but there's less. Story is just considered lore now. You know what I mean? Like this game, the story missions are just lore dumps. And that's the word that they use now. There's no story, there's just lore. Because games don't fucking care about story anymore. They just don't. And when a game pops up that kind of gives a fuck about story, it's like it's this amazing experience that's so great. And not that it's not, but I feel like if there were more stories in more games, the weighted average would be a little bit lower. That's not to say that this game I'm playing doesn't have a story, but it's not at the forefront. The Last of Us Part 2 has been in development for like 5 years. And I'm sure when that comes out, people are gonna nut all over it again, you know? You can scoff, but the biggest games are Fortnite. The biggest games are Fortnite, Call of Duty Warzone, CSGO is still, I mean, they're these just competitive games with a little bit of a skill challenge, but they have no story. But we've seen what happens when you have an influx of story-based games. I mean, look at the Telltale games. There's too much of a good thing. The Subspace Emissary from Brawl, I feel like people hated that mode. I love that mode. I feel like it got a lot of flack, but I really liked it. I guess replayability is a big part too, right? I played Arkham City like 3 times over, back to back, because I really enjoyed the story. You could make a game that's single player that is so much fun that I'll play it 3 times over. It's possible, we just don't see it anymore. How many times can you play a game of Fortnite in an hour? You know, if you suck, you can, like, if you win both games, you could play 2 games of Fortnite an hour, and both of those games would tell their own story of, you know, winning the game. And then if you suck, you could play up to like 12 games an hour. If you're really bad at Fortnite, you could just die immediately and have 12 games. We're at a point where it's quantity over quality, unfortunately. It just sucks that like the majority of games now, like the story is such in the background now. The story is like, it's whatever you want to make it, or it's just not really talked about, you know? Like in the Bleeding Edge review, I didn't really talk about it, but like there's no story. I mean, there is, but it's all in text, or it's in like videos that aren't a part of the main game. A lot of the story that's told through this game is either through these PvE missions or dialogue between characters. And I think that's how you tell a story, is to show, like, talk about things in relation to each other and how they handle issues. Like these characters sometimes talk about how shitty Overwatch is, or how they used to be friends or whatever, and it like, okay, that's a relationship that's going on during this match between the characters. There's ways to tell a story besides just text, and I hate when it's like logbooks, you know, it's like, oh, and then this happened, and it like, or diaries and shit. I hate that. That's so lazy. I almost like, you know, I kind of like how BioShock did story, where a lot of the backstory was in like audio logs, and they're like, oh look, here's an audio log. You don't have to pick it up, but here's the optional story. If I want to know more shit, I can. I like it. I like that a lot. Like I'm not like a story snob where I'm like, oh, this story, oh, it's so stupid. But it's like, I don't think it's that hard to write a really good story. With the money that people put into video gaming, into games itself, don't tell me you can't fucking find a way to make a story interesting, you know? Poggers! 0.09, baby. So I'm just musing about stories. Hey, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like or leave a dislike. Those are fun too. Anyways, guys, I'm out of here. Have a good day.